Hi, I'm Gabby.
Hi, I'm Emily, and today on 8 Days That Changed America, we will be going over
The final NASA shuttle flight in 2011,
Hurricane Katrina in 2005,
Ronald Reagan's Tear Down This Wall speech in 1987,
the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848,
the first African slaves brought to Jamestown in 1619,
9/11,
Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech in 1963.
and the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776.
Hope you enjoy! On July 21, 2011, NASA's Space Shuttle program completed its final and 135th mission when the shuttle Atlantis landed at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. NASA retired the shuttle to focus on a deep space exploration program that can one day send astronauts to asteroids and Mars. On July 8, 2011, Atlantis was launched on its 33rd mission. With 4 crew members aboard, Atlantis flew thousands of pounds of supplies and extra parts to the International Space Station. It was the 37th shuttle flight to make the trip. During its 26 years in service, Atlantis flew almost 126 million miles, circled Earth 4,848 times, and spent 307 days in space. The estimated price tag for the entire space shuttle program from development to retirement was $209 billion, earning the space shuttle its place in history, and making it number 8 on our list.
Early in the morning on August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck the Gulf Coast of the United States. When the storm made landfall, it had a Category 3 rating on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. It brought substantial winds of 100 to 140 miles per hour and stretched some 400 miles across. The storm itself did a great deal of damage, but its aftermath was catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of people in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida were all displaced from their homes, and experts estimate that Katrina caused more than $100 billion in damage. In all, Hurricane Katrina killed nearly 2,000 people and affected some 90,000 square miles of the United States. Today, after years of recovery and rebuilding efforts, people along the Gulf Coast have made great strides in returning to life as usual, even as they would continue to rebuild. Because of this, it is ranked number 7 on our list. On this day in 1987, in one of his most famous Cold War speeches, President Ronald Reagan challenged Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall, a symbol of the repressive communist era in a divided Germany. It was also a reminder that despite the Soviet leader's public statements about the new relationship with the West, the U.S. wanted to see action taken to lessen Cold War tensions. 2 years later, on November 9, 1989, joyful East and West Germans did break down the infamous barrier between East and West Berlin. Germany was officially united on October 3, 1990. We ranked June 12, 1987, number 6 on our list.
At the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls, New York, a women's rights convention, the first ever held in the United States, convened with almost 200 women in attendance in 1848. The convention was organized by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 2 abolitionists who met at the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. As women, Mott and Stanton were barred from the convention floor, and the common indignation that aroused in both of them was the impetus for their founding of the women's rights movement in the United States. On July 19th, 200 women convened at the Wesleyan Chapel, and Stanton read the Declaration of Sentiments and Grievances. Stanton's declaration was modeled closely on the Declaration of Independence, and its preamble featured the proclamation, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." On the second day of the convention, men were invited to attend, and some 40 did, including the famous African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass. That day, the Declaration of Sentiments and Grievances was adopted and signed by the Assembly. The Seneca Falls Convention marked the beginning of the women's suffrage movement in America, giving it its rank of 5 on our list. To satisfy the labor needs of the rapidly growing North American colonies, white European settlers turned in the early 17th century from indentured servants, mostly poor Europeans, to a cheaper, more plentiful labor source, African slaves. Beginning around the summer of 1619, when a Dutch ship brought 20 Africans ashore at the British colony of Jamestown, Virginia, slavery spread quickly through the American colonies. Some historians have estimated that 6 to 7 million slaves were imported to the New World during the 18th century alone. Congress outlawed the import of new slaves in 1808, but the slave population in the U.S. nearly tripled over the next 50 years, and by 1860 it had reached nearly 4 million, with more than half living in the cotton-producing states of the South. Slavery then became the basis for industry in America, boosting the nation's economy by providing the labor needed in areas like the cotton industry, which gives it its rank of 4 on our list.
September 11, 2001, 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airliners and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. 2 of the planes were flown into the towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. The 3rd plane hit the Pentagon just outside Washington, D.C., and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Often referred to as 9/11, the attacks resulted in extensive death and destruction, triggering major U.S. initiatives to combat terrorism and defining the presidency of George W. Bush. Over 3,000 people were killed during the attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C., ranking it number 3 on our list.
On the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., the African-American civil rights movement reached its peak when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to about 250,000 people attending the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The peaceful rally was the largest assembly for a redress of grievances that the Capitol had ever seen, and King was the last speaker. In the year after the March on Washington, the civil rights movement achieved 2 of its greatest successes: the ratification of the 24th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished the poll tax and thus a barrier to poor African American voters in the South, and the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited racial discrimination in employment and education and outlawed racial segregation in public facilities. Through this speech, King paved the way for future generations to live in harmony, giving it its rank of number 2 on our list.
The Declaration of Independence gave birth to what is known today as the United States of America. The document is a symbol of American democracy and one of the charters of freedom. The words stated in the Declaration rallied support from colonists at home and colonists living abroad. The Declaration was adopted by the Continental Congress July 4, 1776. The effects of the Declaration of Independence today can be seen and felt within the United States of America and also among many foreign nations, making this the most significant day in United States history, ranking it number 1 on our list.
I never thought that I'd catch this love bug again. Hopeless, head over heels in the morning.
Early on.
Wait, hold on.
We can cut it out, it's okay.
Alright. I'm gonna practice that word. Oh, crap. Inalienable. Inalienable. Okay. Okay. What do I say? Making it
The 8th most significant event.
Or ranking it number
8.